All tucked in nice and cozy. Of course, you want to strip down right. If you've got dry clothes you want to change and get some dry clothes on. But strip down as much as you can. I put on my nice thin hat to keep my head warm. I don't have as much natural insulation there anymore. But also through the night, as the snow melts and as you move around, you'll get little drips of snow dust on your head, and it's nice to have a little bit extra protection just so you don't get too cold. Our lantern is over there doing its job. We've got our nice reflector and the adapter, which turns the reflector into a base now. You see that candle lantern will burn. That'll burn all night, and that'll keep us nice and toasty warm. So just a couple of other tips about sleeping in a Quincy. Obviously you want a nice warm bag, mummy style I prefer, but whatever works for you. The other thing you need is a good foam underneath you. So you need some good insulation underneath you. You don't want anything that's going to absorb moisture. So one that's either the nylon enclosed, I like the Thermarest, something like that that's got some foam and some air. In the cold, obviously the air is going to contract a little bit, but you just adjust it to what you need. You want to make sure the surface underneath you is fairly smooth as well. It will, even through your sleeping bag and the mat, you will melt a little bit of snow underneath, so each night you have to kind of smooth out and dig out any ice bed that you have there. So some extra tips just to keep you nice and cozy. A couple of other things I mentioned. You want to make sure you're dry. So Quincy building is fairly labor intensive. You spend a lot of energy piling up the snow, and then you spend a lot of energy digging out the snow, and you want to make sure that you kind of regulate that so you don't get too sweaty and wet. If you do, you want to dry out, or if you have a change of clothes, definitely want to get into some dry clothes before you go to bed. If you don't have dry clothes, then strip down as close to naked as you can get. So just a couple more tips on sleeping. It's always tempting. People want to get inside and pull right inside their sleeping bag and get their nice warm breath in there, warming things up, and that seemed like a good idea, but it actually backfires. If you breathe inside your sleeping bag, you can see my breath there. That's moisture, and that moisture will condense against the cold of the outside of the sleeping bag, and pretty soon it'll get wet and you'll start losing insulation value in your sleeping bag. So yeah, you want to be covered up. You want to tuck your mummy in and tighten it right up. You got a little neck cowl here that you put right up around your neck to keep all the heat down below your shoulders. But always keep your nose out or your mouth out so you're breathing outside. Keep that moisture outside. One other thing to watch just in a Quincy is, I mentioned the little snowflakes or sometimes drips if it gets warm enough in here. They can get your bag a little wet. I mentioned getting a nice waterproof bag underneath, but sometimes it's nice to have a thin bivy sack to actually pull over the top, just so if you bump the roof that the ice crystals, if you brush them off quick, they won't melt, but just so they don't melt and get your bag wet. Especially down around your feet, because it takes a lot of energy to build a huge Quincy, so you don't want it too much bigger than your feet, which means with the dome shape that your feet are kind of in a little corner often. And so you want to be able to move your feet without getting too wet down there. So either a little plastic bag over the end, or like I say, a little bivy sack that'll keep the sleeping bag from getting too wet. So, good morning. Had a nice sleep out here. The nice thing about Quincy's is they're extremely quiet. So if the wind's blowing, you get a lot of noise, or if you're in an area where there's traffic or other kind of things in the area, this is the most peaceful place you can have. You noticed, I don't know if you noticed when we were cutting, we've got a nice dome shape to the dome. Just cut that with your shovel. Just as you breathe in here and as it kind of warms up in here, it will harden and form a nice hard shell. It's good for extra strength and protection. Means you have to be extra cautious with ventilation because initially the snow is quite breathable, but as soon as it starts freezing up, then there's not much air circulation through the snow anymore. So you need to make sure you have good air ventilation through your door. Sometimes you can cut an extra ventilation hole, or actually, if you notice over where the lantern is, it's starting to melt a little hole right up in through here. Sometimes it'll actually melt all the way up through there just with the heat from the chimney, and will make its own little extra ventilation hole, which will give some nice cool air dropping down there and then running out the door. You want it's nicer to have it a little farther in so all the heat doesn't go up that chimney as well. So if it does make its own little chimney, I usually just move it into the interior a little more, just to preserve a little more of the heat inside.